in their own midst who did not worship as they worshiped. These were not freedom-loving people, they were power-loving people, and land-loving people, and property-seeking people, and let us be clear, they were, and I do not mean this as a criticism, it is just a simple statement of fact, they left Europe because they were losing, they were dying, they could not succeed there. They were the losers of their respective societies, not the winners. The winners didn't get on the boat. If you were winning in the old world, you didn't get on the boat and risk life and limb to travel for weeks on end to get to a new place where you didn't even know where the hell you were going. The winners stayed put. The losers, the ones who were at the bottom of the pile, were the ones who got on the boat. With very few exceptions to that. So when we talk about when my family came over on the Mayflower, I've always been like, okay, you might not want to talk about that. You might want to just keep that one to yourself. But that reinforces that dominant narrative, makes the dominant group feel good, and then he downplays race as an issue, and that makes us feel good, and he distances himself from angry black people, even when those angry black people's version of history is infinitely more accurate than his own. So white folks flip out when Jeremiah Wright said what he said. Black folk did not flip out. They actually asked a black woman who's a parishioner of Jeremiah Wright's at Trinity in Chicago shortly after the whole controversy broke in the parking lot. They cornered her and they asked her whether or not they thought that maybe some of Reverend Wright's statements had been extreme and radical. And she said, no, I think it's about being black in America. And the reporter had no idea what to make of that, nor did most white people. Because when you have a man who stands up and accuses his own nation of engaging in state terrorism, the vast majority of white folks think that that's not only blasphemous and unpatriotic, but insane. How can he say that? He can say it because he's read books. He can say it because he knows the history of the country, and he didn't even share half of it with you. He gave a few examples of it, but he didn't share the best ones. He didn't talk about what we did in the Philippines at the turn of the 20th century, killing at least 500,000, if not 1.5 million innocent people, just to destroy the birth of democracy and independence in that land. But that's what we did. And he didn't talk about the overthrow of Iranian democracy in '53, Guatemalan democracy in '54, Chilean democracy in '73, on September 11, 1973, as a matter of fact. So that date has other meaning for other people that we forget, conveniently so. He doesn't talk about the overthrow of the government of Indonesia and the installation of a butcher who killed at least 1.5 million people in that nation over the next 10 to 15 years. He doesn't talk about any of that. Or rather, Reverend Wright does. And no one else can, certainly not if they want to be president, because if you say that, you ostensibly hate America. Which is sort of ironic, isn't it? Because if I speak out against American atrocities, against atrocities committed by this government in my name, and somehow that criticism makes me un-American, isn't that like saying that America is ipso facto synonymous with murder? Isn't that like saying that indeed that's all it means to be an American, or a US American in particular? Isn't it like saying that the United States is inherently about imperialism, inherently about genocide, inherently, and I don't believe any of that to be true. But if you criticize me and criticize others for making that point, as if saying that as an American, you have just decided that America equals murder. Voluntary associations, to understand that real equity exists when people of color can be every bit as mediocre as white people and still have opportunity. Mediocrity is the greatest white privilege of all. So you can graduate 5th from the bottom of your military academy if you're white, and that's okay. You can go to 4 different colleges in 6 years and barely graduate at all if you're white, and that's okay. You can get a C- average at Yale, go back, give a speech in which you say, there's something wrong with that. I mean, after all, you can actually become president with grades like that, and that's okay. If any person of color were to dismiss educational accomplishment in the way that these white folk do, or to exemplify such a lack of commitment to educational accomplishment, we would view them as inherently inferior. We would view them as probably not even deserving to get into college. They probably only got in because of affirmative action, don't you know? But white folk can damn near not graduate at all, and everything's fine. See, mediocrity is the privilege of the dominant group. This is why, for people of color, God forbid you do speak English well because, you know, you're born here and, you know, it's your language. And people are always stunned when people of color can speak it well. Right? Because, again, the assumption is that that's bizarre. Right? people, this is why I meet young Asian brothers and sisters around the country that talk about, they're like third generation in this country, okay? So they do speak a little English, And people come up to them regularly when they do speak English really well, and they'll say things like, so where are you from? And they'll be like, St. Louis. And then the questioner, assuming that the person to whom the question was posed just didn't hear them very well, maybe they're just not very bright, decides to speak louder and more slowly. And so they say it again. No, I mean, where are you really from? St. Louis. And then we really get irate because we're not getting through, So then we say, no, I mean, where is your family from? And they're like, Kansas City. Can we stop now? Because they are not assumed to belong. That's the privilege of whiteness. Because if you ask me where I'm from, and I tell you Nashville, see, we're done. We're done. Nobody ever says, no, jackass. I mean, what part of Western Scotland are your people from? Go back. Go back. Didn't bring the black and brown folks in. Who's the boss going to hire to replace your ass? Black and brown folk. And then you're going to get mad at them. Not the white boss who just tricked you and then hired the very people that you didn't want to bring in an act of solidarity. You're going to get pissed at black people and burn down their neighborhoods, which is what happened throughout the first 40 years of this country's 20th century, in city after city after city, working class white folks bombing on the basis of this here, and not what was actually in their economic, historical, and cultural interest. That's a trick. That's what whiteness is. Fast forward to the present day, you got folks running around saying all we got to do to boost the wages of white working people and all working people is to close that border. And you know which one I mean, always the southern border. Never that northern border. The Minutemen don't camp out shooting at the boats coming from Nova Scotia. It's only one border we worry about, brown people coming across it. My goodness, we can't have that. And folks want to make it a populist issue. And they say, well, it's not personal, it's not racial. No, it's not at all. Because the blood that flows through the veins of those people in this room called white is not just the blood of slave owners, it is not just the blood of Klansmen and bigots, it is also the blood of abolitionists and freedom riders. And when we forget that, when we forget that we called white have a choice to make, that we called white do not have to follow those persons to whom we have been asked to hitch our wagon, that we don't have to follow the people who have been held up as the heroes and the sheroes, but rather that we can pick our own, and that they can be John Fee and Angelina and Sarah Grimke, and they can be Ellsbury Ambrose and Ann Braden and Matt Seacrest, and they can be Jeremiah Everts, who was one of those white folks who led the fight against indigenous person removal in this country. When we learn that we have those choices to make, and that we have the right to decide what it means to live in this skin, and not to have that dictated by somebody else or by the weight of history, then that frees us. And then that's what liberates us. That's what emancipates us. If there is such a thing needed in the white community, it is to be emancipated from the shackles of this history that we have put on our own ankles and on our own wrists and around our own necks in the name of white supremacy, a system which is, as I speak, not just killing millions of people potentially around the globe and having done so for so many years, but which is killing us as well, whether we realize it or not. And so as James Baldwin said, the world is before you. You need not take it or leave it as you found it when you came in. Thank you very much.